10 years ago, to be trans was a mental fucking illness. And now all of a sudden, people like you have fucking weaseled your way into the world. You are an infection. You are the definition of weakness. Everything that is wrong with the world is because of you.
This is Sean Strickland, the most polarizing man in mixed martial arts, a two-time UFC middleweight champion who shocked the world not once, but twice. First by dethroning Israel Adesanya in one of the biggest title fight upsets in UFC history, and then by becoming the first man to defeat the seemingly unstoppable Khamzat Chimaev. But that's not what Sean Strickland is really known for.
Come on, Amy, let's talk about the let's talk about the Come on, Amy.
I have a serious question.
Let's get Paramount to call me and bitch me.
Star and someone.
Let me ask you something. Are you
had the chance
no,
to
are
interact with a more diverse
are you
amount of-
let me know, are you gay?
Could I get an answer?
Well, no, I'm asking, this is a part of, are you a gay man?
I'm an ally of the community.
Okay. If you had a son and he was like, you had a son, he was gay, you'd be like, oh man, you don't want a grandkid?
No problem with it.
Oh man, well, dude, you're a weak fucking man, dude. You're part of the fucking problem. So when I start my clothing company and I open up a couple sweatshops, how do I get to the meat and potatoes of work harder, no food for you till you finish?
Over the years, Strickland has been labeled a racist, a misogynist, a neo-Nazi, a psychopath, and just about every other insult imaginable. He sparked outrage in interviews, gone viral for controversial comments, and repeatedly found himself at the center of headlines for all the wrong reasons. Ahead of UFC 312 in Australia, he was even involved in an altercation during Fight Week that generated widespread backlash and renewed questions about whether he had gone too far. To some fans, Sean Strickland is one of the few fighters willing to say exactly what's on his mind. To others, he's the most controversial athlete in combat sports. But long before the UFC titles, the viral interviews, and the endless controversy, Sean Strickland was a troubled kid growing up in a violent household. And the story of how that kid became one of the most feared and talked about fighters on the planet is far more unbelievable than most people realize. Because to understand Sean Strickland the fighter, you first have to understand Sean Strickland the person. Sean Strickland was born on February 27, 1991 in Anaheim, California. But unlike most future champions, Sean didn't grow up dreaming about becoming a professional athlete. He grew up surviving. Throughout his childhood, Sean lived in a household defined by violence. His father was physically and emotionally abusive, creating an environment where fear became a normal part of everyday life. Years later, Sean would openly discuss the trauma he experienced growing up. He described constant fights inside the home and living with the fear that his father could seriously hurt or even kill his mother.
I grabbed the torch, smack it off his head, grab the phone, call the cops, run down the hill. Oh my God.
For most people, childhood is where values and beliefs are formed. For Sean Strickland, it was where anger began to take over. As he got older, that anger followed him everywhere. He became involved in fights, developed an aggressive personality, and struggled to fit in with those around him. At one point, Sean would later admit that he had embraced racist and extremist beliefs that were influenced by people close to him growing up. His life was spiraling in a dangerous direction. Then everything changed because of one decision. His mother took him to a mixed martial arts gym. At first, it was simply an outlet for his anger, a place where he could fight without getting arrested. But what Sean found inside that gym was something he had never really experienced before: purpose. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who didn't care about his past, his problems, or where he came from. The only thing that mattered was how hard he was willing to work. And almost immediately, Sean became obsessed. What started as a way to escape his problems quickly became the center of his entire life. Without realizing it, Sean Strickland had just found the thing that would save him. By the age of 14, Sean Strickland was spending nearly all of his free time inside the gym. The more he trained, the more natural fighting became. Coaches quickly noticed something different about him. Sean wasn't just talented, he genuinely loved fighting. While many young fighters were nervous before stepping into the cage, Sean seemed completely comfortable with it. Years of chaos at home had made competition feel normal. As he gained experience, he built a reputation for being aggressive, fearless, and incredibly durable. Before long, Sean began competing in amateur mixed martial arts competitions across California, and he kept winning. The success only fueled his obsession. Rather than pursuing a traditional career path, Sean made a decision that would completely shape the rest of his life. He was going all in on MMA. At just 17 years old, Sean officially turned professional. It was a massive gamble. Most fighters his age were years away from making that decision. But Sean believed he had found his calling, and he was about to prove it. Over the next few years, Strickland tore through the regional scene. Fight after fight, he continued building his reputation as one of the most promising prospects in California. His pressure-heavy boxing style overwhelmed opponents, while his cardio allowed him to push a pace very few fighters could match. The UFC had started paying attention. Scouts viewed him as one of the most promising young prospects in the sport. Then came the phone call every fighter dreams about. The UFC wanted him. At just 23 years old, Sean Strickland had reached the biggest stage in mixed martial arts. But getting to the UFC was one thing. Staying there would be another challenge entirely. In 2014, Sean Strickland made his UFC debut against Bubba McDaniel. The pressure was enormous. Years of hard work had led to this moment, and Sean delivered, finishing McDaniel in the very first round. The performance immediately put the middleweight division on notice. Over the next few years, Strickland continued proving he belonged among the UFC's elite prospects. Victories over fighters like Luke Barnett and Tom Breeze showcased his toughness and determination. But for every step forward, there seemed to be another obstacle waiting. Losses began appearing on his record, including a defeat to future welterweight champion Kamaru Usman. The reality was becoming clear. Sean Strickland was good, very good, but was he championship material? At the time, few people believed he was, and then things got even worse.
I was riding back from Kings and I got in an accident. It wasn't my fault, but I've been blacked out for a good minute. I just came to after surgery.
Got hit by a car and destroyed my knee, tore my patella. I still have a torn quad, missing part of my kneecap.
And I remember waking up, I started crying. I just seen like my dreams just drift away. That was one of the hardest things.
It's gonna be a long road back, but I love fighting, you know, so I'll get back on the ball and make it happen.
In 2018, disaster struck. Sean Strickland was involved in a serious motorcycle accident that nearly ended his career. The crash left him unconscious and severely injured. Most notably, his knee suffered catastrophic damage. The injury required surgery. Recovery would take years. For a fighter whose entire identity revolved around competing, it was devastating. Questions immediately began surfacing. Would he ever fight again? Would he ever be the same fighter again? Nobody knew, including Sean himself. The comeback process was brutal. Months became years. Every training session felt like a battle, but quitting was never an option, because Sean Strickland had spent his entire life overcoming adversity, and this would be no different. When he finally returned to the cage, few people expected what happened next. Sean Strickland returned in 2020, and somehow he looked better than ever. The years away had done nothing to slow him down. If anything, they had made him more dangerous. One by one, contenders started falling. Brendan Allen, Krzysztof Jotko, Uriah Hall, Jack Hermanson. Suddenly, Sean Strickland wasn't just another fighter on the roster. He was becoming a legitimate title contender. His confidence grew with every victory. So did his popularity and his controversy. Outside the cage, Sean's unfiltered personality was making headlines almost as often as his performances. Fans either loved him or hated him. There was rarely any middle ground. Then came the biggest test of his career, a fight against Alex Pereira, and it would change everything. At UFC 276, Sean Strickland faced Alex Pereira. The former kickboxing world champion was one of the most dangerous strikers in combat sports. Many believe Sean's pressure-heavy style would be too much. Instead, disaster struck.
Good, because he's...
Oh! Massive move from Pereira!
That's it.
That's why!
what I'm talking
Pereira
about.
has done it again!
That's why.
You cannot stand in front of that man.
Can't play with that dude.
Just 2 minutes into the fight, Pereira landed a devastating left hook. Sean Strickland was unconscious. For many fighters, a knockout loss like that would destroy any hopes of fighting for a title. The public wrote him off. Analysts wrote him off. The UFC moved on, or so they thought. Over the following year, Sean quietly rebuilt his momentum. He defeated Nasruddin Imavov. He stopped Abus Magomedov. And then something happened that almost nobody expected. The UFC offered him a title shot against Israel Adesanya, the reigning champion, one of the greatest middleweights of all time. Sean accepted immediately. Most people believed he had no chance. What happened next would become one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. Almost nobody believed he could win, and honestly, why would they? Across the octagon stood one of the greatest middleweights the UFC had ever seen, a fighter who had dominated the division for years, a fighter who had embarrassed elite contenders, a fighter many considered untouchable. Israel Adesanya wasn't supposed to lose that night, especially not to Sean Strickland. The betting odds reflected it, the media reflected it, the fans reflected it. To most people, Sean wasn't getting a title shot because he deserved one. He was getting a title shot because the UFC needed a replacement opponent on short notice. He was supposed to lose. But Sean Strickland had spent his entire life proving people wrong. On September 10th, 2023, inside Sydney's Kudos Bank Arena, he walked to the octagon with the biggest opportunity of his life in front of him. 25 minutes stood between him and immortality. Then the fight started, and almost immediately, something felt different. Sean wasn't intimidated. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't fighting like a man grateful to be there. He was fighting like a champion. Round after round, he marched forward. His jab repeatedly found its target. His pressure never stopped. And for the first time in years, Israel Adesanya looked uncomfortable. Then came the moment nobody expected. Late in the first round, Sean landed a crushing right hand that sent Adesanya crashing to the canvas. The arena erupted. The MMA world froze. The impossible was suddenly becoming possible. As the fight continued, Sean refused to slow down. Every round that passed made it more obvious. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. Sean Strickland was genuinely out fighting one of the greatest champions the sport had ever seen. By the championship rounds, disbelief had turned into shock, and shock had turned into history. 25 minutes after the fight began, the final horn sounded. Sean Strickland raised his hands, not because he knew he had won, but because for the first time in his life, he knew he had given absolutely everything. Then came the scorecards.
The score of this contest, 49-46, for the winner by unanimous decision,
And with those scorecards, everything changed. The troubled kid from California, the fighter everyone wrote off, the man who almost lost his career in a motorcycle accident, the man who had been knocked unconscious just a year earlier, was now the UFC middleweight champion of the world. Sean Strickland had done the impossible. For most champions, the belt is the destination. For Sean Strickland, it was proof. Proof that no matter where you come from, your past doesn't have to define your future. Because when Sean Strickland was growing up, nobody looked at him and saw a future world champion. They saw a troubled kid, a kid surrounded by violence, a kid consumed by anger, a kid heading down a path that rarely ends well. And for a long time, they were probably right. But somewhere along the way, Sean found fighting, and fighting found Sean. The sport didn't erase his trauma. It didn't erase his mistakes. It didn't erase the controversy that would follow him throughout his career. But it gave him something he never had before: purpose. From sleeping with fear in his own home, to standing alone under the brightest lights in combat sports, Sean Strickland climbed a mountain that almost nobody believed he could climb. He survived an abusive childhood. He survived his own self-destructive behavior. He survived career setbacks. He survived a motorcycle accident that nearly ended everything. And when the world told him he wasn't good enough to become champion, he proved them wrong too. Love him or hate him, agree with him or disagree with him, there is one thing that cannot be denied. Sean Strickland's journey to the top of the UFC is one of the most unlikely stories in mixed martial arts history. Because before he became a champion, before he became a headline, before he became the most controversial man in MMA, Sean Strickland was simply a kid trying to survive. And somehow, against every possible odd, he made
Thanks to all the fans out there to watch and support, man. Thanks for all the guys that do interviews. It means a lot. You know, getting my name out there, and I appreciate everything.